filming yourself is a really good idea. It's also scary because you realize what you're doing wrong, and it's never ideal because you think you sound amazing, and then you hear it back and you go, oh, guess I'm giving up then.
Hey Emma, what drum kit do you use?
Am I too old to start playing drums?
Should I get lessons?
How do I play fast?
cost
When
so
will I
much?
start sounding good?
So today we're talking about coordination and how to improve it. I think Chris is going to take it away to begin with, because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to drums and coordination. So take it away, my man.
Yeah, I think just looking at the Instagram polls and all the interaction on our socials and Facebook as well now, that coordination is the biggest question that's surrounding actual playing that isn't equipment and gear and that side of things. And it's quite hard to give a blanket answer to this, but because at different levels, you need to work on different things in different orders. And so I think it's important to kind of, depending on what level you're at, but if you're a beginner, I think when it comes to coordination, the key things is to make sure that you start practicing anything really slowly, and just make sure that it's as slow as you can possibly make it. And whatever you're playing at is probably not slow enough. Reduce that by 50%, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're probably at about the right speed.
I give the advice so slowly that you can't play it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that literally means you can, to this point where you could be at like 5 BPM and you go, I am now going to play hi-hat and bass drum, bang. The next one is going to be a hi-hat by itself, hi-hat. If that's what you need to start with just to build that coordination, then that's what you need. You know, the next one is going to be the kick drum by itself, you know. And I think so that's literally as slow as I'll break it down with my students when we're doing lessons. And I know it's sometimes difficult to then go, well, I don't know if I'm playing things right. And this is the next problem, right? Is that because it's not fast enough to be able to hear the pattern, if it's a song or if it's a beat that you have in your head, then you don't know if you're actually playing it right. So do you have any suggestions for that, Emma?
I think that's where being able to read and count starts to come in a little bit. Because if you can count it, or at least say it out loud, like the bass drum pattern or whatever, it just helps to give you a little step up. Also, if you're learning, it's really good, especially at the beginning, straight out the gate, to be counting out loud, because you develop that association with words and what you can kind of sing / hear in your head coming out your mouth, and therefore also coming out of your hands at the same time. The earlier you can start to develop that, the better, honestly.
Yeah, 100% agree. And for the 95% of the time, the response to that is, well, it's more difficult to count and play at the same time.
Yes,
so what's your kind of advice countering that?
That's a good point. I think if you're already playing to a reasonable level, going backwards can be hard. I found this specifically with piano, because my playing ability was so far ahead of my reading ability, which was non-existent and kind of still is. It's really hard going backwards. So I'd say do it in small bursts, maybe, or do it specifically for like fills or something. If like find one thing that you tell yourself you're going to use it with, because it will help, especially with fills, because grooves are a little bit more predictable. You can kind of usually, unless it's something like Tower of Power or something ridiculously complicated, you know, lots of ghost notes and no consistent hi-hat, it's usually going to be pretty predictable. It's got a solid framework, whereas fills are usually a bit more up in the air and require counting. So maybe starting with that kind of thing, or you can do it the other way. Why not? Counting grooves might be simpler. So you kind of, as long as you're counting something, as you start developing like that skill, that's all that matters. And even if you're doing it for like, I don't know, if you're doing half-hour practice and you only do 10 minutes of it and then you go and play songs that you like playing, if it's the thing that keeps you playing, like, do it. As long as you're developing it to some degree alongside what you're normally doing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that tends to resonate with my students, it doesn't mean that they continue to do it. They need lots of reminding about this. But is if you get it now, we're talking about counting specifically here, the better you get at doing it at the same time now, the easier things are going to become later on down the line. And when you want to play those complex patterns that you often, you know, you're aspiring to be able to play, they're going to be
Mhm.
so much easier if you can count. Like there's no
Yes.
doubt about it. And obviously in
Mhm.
different cultures in the world, um, especially in a lot of areas in Asia, they voice it out. They don't count, but they make the sounds of the different drums that they may be playing, right?
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
a similar form. That's the same type of thing.
Well, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent
Yeah.
about this is turning into more of an episode about counting than it is coordination. But I think also what really helped me in terms of reading and being able to count, it just changed the game for me because when I started playing, I was quite young, but I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. I couldn't count, didn't understand until my teacher was like, just use word association. So a quarter note is tea, eighth note's a coffee, 16th notes a Coca-Cola. You've got one double and double one, like as kind of one double
Yeah.
double one coordination. Like that level of things just unlock the whole world of reading in a very short space of time. So even if it feels dumb, especially if you're an adult, going tea, coffee, coffee, tea, one double tea, like it feels silly because it is, but it's also extremely effective. So that shouldn't stop you from doing it.
I think just try and enjoy it and laugh with it. It's
Yes.
like try and actually have fun with that.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mhm.
counting anyway just sounds and feels silly regardless. So I think all of it just
Mhm.
feels silly. And
Yeah.
as Emma just said, we're talking a lot about counting here, but that's the
Mhm.
foundation to helping you develop coordination. And
Yeah.
people don't want to hear it because it's the answer that they hoping there's some other magical thing that's going to do it. But
Yeah.
like counting is so fundamentally like integral to being able to coordinate. Now, are there people that can coordinate crazy things without any counting? Yes. Those examples of people are probably people that are surrounded by musical families from a really young age that just, let's take the gospel community as an example, right? Where they're just like absorbed in it. And it is what I refer to as a mother tongue. So yes, there's those people, but it's like learning a language. If you're bilingual as a kid because you've got two parents that speak different languages, you're just going to pick it up. If you've got to go and learn it at a later date, you can't learn it the same way because our brains have changed at that point. So counting is one of those ways it's going to be able to break it down for you. And then when you come to read, it's then easier again because you understand that. A lot of the books that Emma's written, we also do block notation, right? Which is somewhere in between like a tab slash and like drum notation, but it's just blocked out so you can see it with colors, which has been quite popular. But even that, like being able to count, will make that easier, right? And so
Absolutely.
I think that's like it just keeps coming back. Everything that you try and do, that's going to be a barrier that if you remove it, it's going to be easier.
But just an FYI, I didn't start counting properly until I got to uni. I didn't start using one iana, two iana until I got to uni, and then it just clicked so much easier because I already knew what I was reading. Even though I was calling it different things, it doesn't really matter what you're calling it. Unless you're starting to get into the specifics of, I want to put an accent on the E of 3. Like, okay, cool. That's where it starts to get relevant. But when you're just reading things like charts for yourself and you just want to be able to play the rhythm correctly, tea, coffee, coffee, tea, one double, yada, yada, yada.
And you're talking about tea and coffee there, obviously, like tea being a quarter note, coffee being eighth note, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that just...
And it also helps you with the sticking. Yeah, and it helps you with the sticking as well. If you're like single strokes, a lot of people go, I need to sort my sticking out and therefore I need to go into rudiments. No. Take a step back. It's all single stroke. It's all going to be leading with the right. And that having that word association just helps so much because you instantly know that coffee is right, left. Or if you're left-handed, left, right,
Yeah.
So that takes that element of thinking about it away as well. Yeah. So it's a double whammy.
Yeah. Yeah, all the different ones. And guys, there's so many different ways you can approach it. Just go on YouTube and search all the different countings and whatever, right? I've heard
you can make it up.
You can make one up. That's always a good one.
Yeah.
Paradiddles, Pepsi Cola, Pepsi, whatever it is, right? Whatever works for you. So, like, again, if people are interested and want to know more about that specific side of things, then reach out to us. We can try and help on that front.
I definitely need to write a book / course on this because I think it's changed the game for me.
Yeah, this is a good point. Yeah, definitely. Maybe write that down, Emma, whilst we remember it. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. So and then so the next level. Let's just say that we've got counting down. We're all good, and this is fine. Or you're some kind of superhuman doesn't need to count, but you probably won't be listening to this if that's the case. So coordination wise, it's then developing that level of coordination and getting that limb independence. There's a few different set of like conceptual exercises that you can work through, right? And again, this is depending on what style of music you want to play, but I'm just going to go with what is the vast majority of the people that I think watch what we're doing, and that's going to be pop, rock, funk, that contemporary stuff, right? So there's maybe some differences here with jazz, and so that's its own beast that I would put to one side for this, but still similar concepts that will apply to this. But yeah, there's a little bit different. So I guess the most famous book that I know of that covers coordination with being able to play with different bass drum coordination is Time Functioning Patterns by Gary Chafee. I hope I said his name wrong. It's something like that. And the big exercise in there that has been pulled out to most degrees for drumming and everything that I've seen over the web and been regurgitated time and time again is the fat backs exercise. And basically what this does is that it takes every single different combination of whatever, so bass drum patterns, in this case, that you can play within 16th notes. Yeah, all the different so you play the bass drum on the 1, the E, the and, the R. Yeah, so just boom, dat, boom, dat. If it's on the E, dat, dat, 1, E and 2, etc. And it goes for all the different combinations, right? We're actually writing a book called the Groove Matrix at the moment that's taking that concept but a little bit further and helping you apply it and break it down without having to read music. So it's got the block notation that we're talking about in there, and it goes through all those combinations, because that's actually been the biggest barrier I found with that exercise, is that people can't read music or don't want to read music, could benefit from this exercise, but because they can't read, they struggle to remember all the different variations of this. So that goes through that, and then basically what happens, you've got all the different bass drum combinations, okay, and this particular exercise, the snare drum stays on the backbeat on the 2 and the 4, and then what you do is you play through all the different bass drum combinations with all of the different hi-hat ostinatos or ride ostinatos and repeat. So ostinato being a repeating pattern. So for example, on the hi-hats, you can be playing 8th notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then you'll go through all the different combination of bass drum patterns that are possible with 16th notes. Then you'll do the same thing, but this time you'll then play 16th notes, 1 E and 2 E and 3. Then you'll do the same with quarters, all the different combinations that you can have playing on the ride with the stepped hi-hat, etc., etc. And it goes down that rabbit hole. We've done some sheets and written out these. So the first few examples against the fatbacks exercise, you can actually see it written out rather than trying to do it in your brain, because it's a lot of conceptual stuff.
Especially straight out the gate, yes.
It's a mind melter, like it's a mind melter. And this, I would say, for is intermediate upwards, this exercise, okay? We have done a like slightly simplified version with 8th notes.
I was going to say, 8th notes is,
But it doesn't give you the same level of different combinations, and you could probably just work for a bunch of different 8th note patterns that will develop a bit of that coordination, but it generally doesn't give that to you if you're playing 8th notes on the hi-hat as well. So that's a really good exercise, but I really refer to it as a concept because there are millions of different combinations from that one sheet, right? And so it sounds quite overwhelming, hence why we're writing a book to break it down and really just look at that so you can build on that. Then you can take that same concept and apply it to triplets. So with shuffle, so you can do the same thing, all the different triplet, etc., etc. So there's a triplet, fatbacks, different time signatures. The list goes on, right? So, but that's a really fantastic exercise. So if that's something that people want a lesson on, we can definitely break that down and do that at some point.
I think I've done at the very least. I've talked about the 8th note, like moving the 8th note through the bar, on the kick. Because that, honestly, if that is the quickest way you can get to writing your own grooves, they're simple grooves, but it means you have mild independence with your kick drum because you can play a bass drum with whatever hi-hat you want, basically. You don't have to worry about the in-betweens, which just gets you going and also gets you used to counting 8th notes without having to dive into 16th notes and kind of freak out about that. So I think that's a great exercise. I think on the more advanced end of things, I think things just become more and more minute when it comes to detail. This is where like click comes in. Um, and I mean, you'd want to play with the click with the fatback exercise as well, but I really love the fine tuning element. So something you want to avoid is called flamming. Flams are a good thing normally, but between limbs, you don't generally want it. So you don't want your ride
Yes.
cymbal and your bass drum coming down like kind of
Mm-hmm.
staggered
Yeah.
timing. You might not
Most
notice
of the
that you're
time.
doing it. Yeah, you might not notice that you're doing it. This is why also filming yourself is a really good idea. It's also scary because you realize what you're doing wrong, and it's never ideal because you think you sound amazing, and then you hear it back and you go, "Oh, guess I'm giving up then." But it's really worth looking at because the level up that happens when you just bring your limbs together in like time
Mm-hmm.
wise
Mm-hmm.
is just, plus with a click, instantly you'll sound 1,000 times better if
Yeah.
you do that.
Yeah. You know
And you
what's
can do it,
funny
you
is,
don't have to do it all the time like with the limbs, like you can do it like just working on between two limbs. You don't have to be doing four-way coordination or trying to figure all that out straight out the gate. You
mm,
can obviously later down the line, but it helps you to hone in specifically on the relationship between two limbs at a time and then lock it all together.
yeah, that's really true, and that leads on to what I was going to talk about next. You stole my thing about the filming yourself, but
You're welcome.
that is definitely 100% with all this the whole way through. You've got no excuse. Phones now are high enough quality to hear it, and you should be watching yourself back. You know, like it's critical, and that gets you into that kind of being able to self-assess, right? But just taking what Emma was saying about breaking it down. So there's a couple of different ways you can then break things down. So let's use an example. You're learning a groove from a song, but you can't coordinate it. Okay, so what are you going to do now, right? So what Emma's saying there, you could work on just two of the limbs. What are the problem ones? Okay, so let's just say we're taking a 4 to the floor, right, where the bass drum dun 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 dun, and when we hit the snare drum, as Emma said, you hit the hands together, but the kick drum slightly out, right? You watch it back and you can hear that it's not all perfectly falling in unison. You can just practice then the left hand and the right foot, which for some reason for right-handed people, this is the one that just doesn't seem to be able to coordinate together. And you can just try it, honestly, just left hand, right foot, bang, 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 and just see if you can do it. And you just want to get that time in, even random intervals, and see if you can get those to land together. That's how much you can break this down. You can do the same, then add the right hand in and see, does that make it easier, harder? Okay. The right hand and the kick drum, that should be fairly simple, but it's that left hand and the right kick that's
I mean,
a
it's
nightmare for
always
that
the
one.
left hand. Always.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
left hand is always the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Hence why you wrote left hand boot camp, right? It's
This
to
is
get
true.
that left hand to be
This is
stronger,
true.
because it's just weak in general. And
Yeah.
that's the thing, is that if your left hand was stronger, by default the coordination would be stronger
It
too.
changed the game when I sorted
Yeah.
my left hand out. Just
Yeah.
and it's actually way more simple than you think. The issue is just that your fingers aren't used to engaging. That's it. Like if you've got a fine right hand and you're like, well, this is great, but what's going on with the left? It's just that your left hand isn't used to the fine motor control. So
Yeah.
it's just learning how to coordinate this instead of your hand just defaulting to wrist stuff. It's
Yeah.
in theory, it's simple. Applying it, not always so simple.
And I think there you just, like, you know, if you think about a standard groove, remove the kick for a second, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and that 2 and 4 backbeat is often, you almost use your arm, right? Sometimes, like, a lot of people do the whipping motion, so that is nothing the same as then digga digga digga, whatever it might be, or playing a more intricate groove that has the hand. So all you're doing is that 2 and the 4. So the technique is completely different than when you have to do stuff and coordinate other things, right? So that's why that left, you know, and for every 8 hits, there's 2 snare drum hits. Every 8 on the right, there's 2 on there, or
There's
every 4,
also,
there's 1.
Yeah, also this ties back to being able to count, because if you don't know where things should be falling, then you don't get the timing relationship. So if you find slowing grooves down really hard because you don't know where things are falling, instead you're just feeling
Yes.
the groove.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
technically wrong, but if you really want to fine tune things, which a lot of people will want to do, whether you feel like it or not. This is me going, you need to do this. Yeah, if you don't understand where things are falling, like we've got a snare drum on the and of 3, for example, like if you don't know that, the timing won't be as clean at all. It's like you're trying to, I don't know. It's basically you don't have the framework. You don't have the instructions, basically, of how to play this groove. You're just trying to blag it, basically, which can be fine for simpler stuff. But when you're trying to fine tune things, not always great, especially 16th note stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Once you get to those next levels, and I think like, I was just going to say, my analogy for this is like people go, when I slow it down, I can't play it. Okay, and that's like even more reason why you should slow it down. Okay,
it's not that you can't play it; it's you can't count it.
Yeah, and also what actually you said if you were to, it's basically what it does is it puts a microscope on your playing. Because as you slow down, the wave files expand out. So you're looking closer in. Are they really falling where they should do? And actually things aren't. The timing isn't. And it's all about the note placement, right? So making sure, let's just say we're playing straight feel, it's not a swung feel. Everything is divided evenly to what it should be, right? Or if things are delayed because it's a feel back, that it's pushed back when it should be or pulled forwards, whatever it might be. But it should be, that should be controlled, right? So as soon as you slow that down, that microscope just exposes all of your sorry but sloppy playing, and it makes you actually, you got away. And the faster something is, the more you can get away with sloppy playing. And hence like punk, when you, if you were to take the punk songs that, you know, like let's take I'm not going to name the artist because I'll get backlash for that, but let's just take, you know,
Metallica's first album.
Right, okay, and let's slow that all down. All of a sudden you'll be like, whoa, that's like all over the place, right? So that level of control isn't there. So yeah, it is going to be harder basically. But if you can do it really controlled, slow, when you speed it up, until you hit a barrier of speed, physicality that you can't play any faster, which is a different conversation, right? You're going to hit a barrier, like how fast can you play your foot? Well, it's going to have to maybe change techniques, the heel toe slide, whatever other techniques you might want to use. That then changes into a different realm of physical speed, not really coordination as such. And the new technique obviously does add a level of coordination, but that's that. But, you know, to start with, it's kind of that initial bit. Was that too much of a tangent?
There's so much to talk about. Like, the more you talk about it, you realise there's just more and more to talk about. And that's why people have such a hard time, like, figuring out how to improve on the instrument, because there's so many different aspects you could go into. And this is the benefit of having a teacher as well, because having direction with that, having just someone tell you, you need to do this next, then this next, and this next, just makes life so much easier. I mean, obviously, we were talking last time about the difference between self-taught and not self-taught. And this is, again, highlighting the benefit of having at least some lessons, and potentially over a long period of time as well, the benefit of sustained lessons. But it's just an endless topic, isn't it?
And for those of you that can't afford lessons, for the majority of you listening, and there might be a few exceptions to this, you've probably got access to some kind of recording device, right? It's majority, and I appreciate that's not available to absolutely everybody, but for those of you who do have, that is going to be your teacher and your kind of mentor, effectively, is being able to record it, whether it's just sound or with the video. Generally everything that's available now, the quality is good enough to hear enough, right? And don't get me wrong, you can go into the recording studio and have it all close mic'd, and all of a sudden you'll hear even more things going on, like you're resting the bass drum beater against the skin and it's vibrating and you didn't pick that up on the phone. Of course there's going to be those things, but that's going to be your best friend, and it's going to start off as your enemy, because you're going to watch it back and it's like hearing yourself on voicemail. Right, when you play it back, your own voice, you're like, wow, is that how I sound? You're going to be the same with when you go to listen to yourself drumming. But sometimes you'll record it, think you didn't do that well because you're just not in a good mood that day. You watch it back and like, that was actually really good. And like, so what you thought was bad wasn't. And then the better you get at being self-aware, then the better. And so obviously these are tips for developing coordination, but it all comes down to self-awareness. So a teacher should be developing your self-awareness, right? That's what they should be doing. So if they're not doing that, for me, even from an early age, they might not be from not early age, but a young point in learning, right? An early stage at learning, whether you're an adult or a student, doesn't matter. They should be doing that. Now, they might not be telling you it, but they should be doing it. Yeah, they might not give you the information because it's overwhelming, but they'll be getting you to self-assess. They should be. Any good teacher, in my opinion, basically any discipline should be doing that. They should be getting it so that you can teach yourself, and they become eventually just coaching. They just motivate you really, and spot out little things that you might have missed, right? Or introduce you to new things that you just haven't even entered that whole realm of, yet. But yeah, so it comes back to that self-awareness as well. So the more self-aware you are, the more you're going to be able to develop your coordination. And I think that's a huge one as well. So should we summarize this? I feel like this could do a little summary. So counting is really important. So really getting down
even if it's
counting.
8th notes.
Even if all it is 8th notes. And as Emma said, it doesn't mean your entire practice needs to be counting, right? When you're playing to songs, you play it and enjoy it, jam along, have fun. That's important to balance that. And that's probably a session we'll do on its practice and how to approach practice, right? And I have got a couple of different routines there on that and different ways you can approach doing that to actually enjoy your practice. But so counting, what's the other things? And we talked about the coordination, the flamming. Yeah. So so basically making sure that everything lands exactly where you want it to be able to land. So that means slowing it right down, sometimes breaking it up. So breaking it up into individual hits, individual beats, just one hand, right? And just so you get that could be all it is. And then you're going to go two hands, and then put the two together. So breaking it down. And that might also be breaking it down by removing a limb to just focus on two that you need to, if you've got,
or even reading it out loud and counting it out loud before you even play anything.
Yeah. That's a thing.
And using phonetics as well, using words to kind of, instead of counting the numbers. It's a counterpointed to counting.
That's
point.
Actually just triggered me. There's one thing here that I didn't mention. This is a really good one. There's a saying that if you can say it, you can play it. Super cheesy,
you can say it, you can
right?
play it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, for example, all of what we just talked about, the fat backs, all these different exercises, remove said limb, right hand, left hand, kick drum, step to hi-hat, whatever it is, play the groove, but then sing out loud the one that you've removed. Okay. So let's just say, for example, we're going to remove the kick drum. So you're doing like this. And then what you're going to do as you're playing it is boom, 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 and just literally, however you want to voice the kick drum, you just say the kick drum, okay? And let's say that in the fatbacks example, the second example is the kick being on the E of the 1 and the 3. So it would be, I'm just going to say the hi-hat because I'm not playing, but it's boom, tap, boom, boom. And you just say it, and you wouldn't believe how hard that is to do, right? And then do the same, remove the right hand, and then the same with the snare drum, right? And that coordination is really hard to do. And that's for advanced people as well as beginners. Whatever grooves you are working on, try and do that. Remove one of the limbs and sound it out loud. That is a mind melter. It really is. That's a really good one to do as well. Have you tried that before, Emma?
Maybe. I think I usually use the count if I am, but I think I don't generally, because I just do. The main approach is just play it so slowly you can't play it wrong.
Yeah,
that's the one for me.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting. Try a groove that you find challenging anyway, and try and say one of the parts. You wouldn't believe, because it basically what it does is you really have to understand what it is. You're not just using. And one thing I completely forgot to talk about is sound coordination. So what happens is when you're playing the drums, the sounds that you hear just aid your coordination because you're kind of making it musical, right? So the problem is that you then get used to that sound. So if you go from you probably taught a beginner, Emma, where they've gone on the hi-hat and they've gone over to the ride and just can't play the same rhythm. It's because the sound has changed, right? Or they take the hi-hat, most common one, you're on the hi-hat, you move that to the floor tom, and it sounds like loads of bass drums are going on in your head, dong, dong, and everything falls to pieces. Yet the coordination is exactly the same. So that sound coordination is a really big one.
And also another one that's huge is internal dynamics. So the volume between each limb.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you go from being a rock player and you suddenly decide you want to be a jazz player, your world is about to get a lot more difficult. I'm about to tell you now, because the emphasis in most contemporary music is on the backbeat, so bass drum and snare drum. Whereas in jazz, your backbeat is on your left foot, and the bass drum and the snare drum are just kind of there, but very softly. Trying to do stuff like that, or even if you're playing a groove that you know really well, try changing the sound level of one limb.
That's such a good one.
Or
great,
even better, go from soft, like say you're using your hi-hats, play the same straight 8 groove, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 but make through the bar, make the hi-hat quieter and then make it louder again. That's really hard.
Oh yeah, that's really
That's the other layer of coordination that's going on. It's not always as thought about as much, but dynamics is huge.
Yeah, that's a dynamic independence, right? Is I think generally what I.
Oh my god!
The phrase that I use with my students is balance of voices. So the different balance level, i.e. the volume level of every voice.
Yeah.
And what Emma just said there, you can do again all what we've just said, but then make the hi-hat super quiet. But the kick drum and the snare drum have to stay exactly the same.
Yeah, it stays the same. Yeah.
And the best analogy, and maybe we can get some graphics over this, it could be worth it, is to think about that your hi-hat, your snare drum, and your kick drum is on a mixing desk, right? And literally you are just pulling down the volume of the snare, for example, or of the kick drum, or of the hi-hat, and you're moving the other ones up. So it's just a mixing desk, and you can control it as easy as that. And Emma said,
if you've never done that, your brain's going to melt.
Yeah, it is going to completely melt. So those are things to try out. And I know that probably we said tips for coordination, and we've thrown 7,000 things at you just like
There's
online.
So much.
But I think what'll be interesting is to get feedback from people and going, what would they actually like us to break down and teach? And we can do specific lessons on some of these things that is the kind of most frequently asked ones. And we can actually do a practical approach to this, because obviously a podcast, it gives you some ideas. But if you're like, wait, I don't even understand what this fatbacks exercise is, it's like a lot of it is potentially not very useful. So let us know what you would like.
You could do a whole episode just on that.
We could quite easily, to be honest. It wouldn't be that difficult, would it? I think that's not a bad shout. But yeah, cool. All right,
cool.
Should we wrap it up then? That was.
I think we should. That was a long one.
Yeah. Cool. We'll just wrap it up there, and we'll see you at the next one.
Yeah. See ya.
So, my until quite recently uncoordinated friend, I hope that has helped you in your journey in getting coordinated. If you have any thoughts about all of that, feel free to leave some comments for us down here. But also feel free to check out some other podcasts that we've done. Namely, where we ask the question, does practice make perfect? I know it might seem obvious, but there's more to it than you think. Check it out. Or getting into flow state. This is exactly the route you want to take if you've just started to get more coordinated on drums and you want a bit more freedom. So, check it out.